afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to have the chance to spend some time with you talking about some of the things we're doing in the Major Projects Authority. So that's the slogan, the tagline for the Major Projects Authority, and it's very simple, and it is about not just the done right bit, the project management of the projects themselves, but picking and doing the right projects as well. And that's individually about picking projects that are best going to deliver government policy intent and strategic benefit, but also making sure that we don't pick too many projects. And one of the things government has tended to do in common with a lot of organisations in the past is to start more things than it's been able to deliver as quickly and as effectively as it's wanted to. So part of what we're doing is working with departments to say which of the projects that we need to do, where's the priority, and then making sure that those are delivered effectively. So what I will cover broadly is something about our priorities very quickly. Then look at some of the challenges that we're facing in government using some of the data that we gather from performance across departments, because I think there's some really interesting trends that come through from that. Then offer you some perspectives on what we're calling the profession around project delivery in government, and how we're developing that profession, and pick up on three things in particular around accountability, how we do some of that prioritisation, and then thinking about project initiation a little bit more, and finally come back and talk a little bit about some of our broader responsibilities. So 5 priorities for the Major Projects Authority. The first one is very much around the things that I guess we're traditionally associated with, which is gateway reviews, project assurance reviews, and the kind of analysis that's supporting major investment decisions in government around assurance. But increasingly in this space as well, it's much better if we get to a point where those reviews are undertaken and any kind of problems or issues are well understood, well known, and ideally that some of those problems have been dealt with. So we are moving increasingly to something that looks at how best we support departments. You know, we are a small organisation, less than 80 of us in total, covering the whole of government, and also then trying to build capability across government. So we're never going to get inside every project in huge detail all the time. But by better targeting what we do and better targeting the wealth of expertise that's available in other parts of government, but also outside government from big commercial organisations, from some of the think tanks, and from professional associations like the APM, we think that we can help departments deal with some of those thorny issues before they turn into the problems that we've seen happening in the past. So a big movement to something that is much more active engagement around that. The second bullet is something that's much closer to a government-specific issue, and reflects the fact there's always a balance between central and local control in any kind of system. And the important thing is that the central controls that we have don't get in the way of projects delivering, and that we give the project teams the space to get on and do, as we say on the slide. So we are working very hard with colleagues around the rest of the centre of government to align those controls and make sure that they aren't getting in the way and that they're actually supporting projects and what they're doing. We're then looking at building long-term capability, and I will talk about this as we go through, about building project leaders, and then building the people, everybody who sits around them, so that broader profession. I think when people say to me about what my job's about, the best answer I can give them is that when people go to the pub on a Friday night, they are absolutely proud to boast that their job is delivering some of the biggest, hairiest, most difficult projects you can imagine, and that they have got a great, satisfying career that they're progressing through, that they're continually learning, and that they're getting great experience. So people are really proud to be part of a project delivery profession in government, and one that delivers consistently well. The last bullet there is very much the piece about how do we prioritise activity, how do we think about starting the right projects, and the conversations we're having with departments. Now the bit with all 5 of those areas is that we're moving from a position of the centre mandating things onto departments and coming up with all of the answers to something where we work with departments consistently so that it's a team effort to better deliver. Now, there's always going to be some tensions around that given the assurance roles, but we are starting to move that on, and particularly when I talk about some of the things with the profession, I hope that will start to come through in spades, that we are far stronger doing these things collaboratively than doing them separately. So challenge assurance support, well, last year we did 230 assurance reviews and another 30 follow-ups. The follow-ups are much shorter exercises, but they are looking to see whether key recommendations are being implemented and the progress of projects. That's looking at, therefore, about 4 or 5 assurance reviews a week on average. So a significant activity for us. As I say, probably about 2/3 of the MPA is involved with that frontward-facing look, working with departments, doing the assurance and doing the support activity. But it's really how we address the challenges that becomes interesting. So the next few slides are drawing largely from the data that we use to compile our annual report that's published in May of this year, which is the latest public data that we've got to be able to use to look at some of the challenges that we see in delivering government projects and the progress we're making on those. So first of all, projects by type. When you actually look at what government's doing, the vast majority of it, about 60% in total, is about transforming the way that services are delivered, transforming the services delivered to the citizen themselves, or the way or the mechanisms with that. Now, ICT is a key enabler in there, but there's not very many ICT projects that exist in a vacuum, and usually they are there to enable change to happen and to enable transformation. And when you think about the skill sets that you need to deliver that transformation activity, there's some commonality with the more traditional infrastructure and big equipment programs, but there are also some very different skills, and there's a lot in there about how we bring people along and how we change cultures and processes, as well as how we actually deliver the core project in terms of an ICT project, or as you would have done, say, a building or a piece of military equipment. And when you look across the piece, as we will do, it's not only cost that matters in that. Some of those transformation projects are relatively small in financial terms, but the implications of getting them wrong or getting them right are very, very significant. So if you take an example from defence and you take the changes happening to the way that MOD is going about buying and supporting defence equipment through the Defence Equipment and Support, the actual cost of that is relatively small when you look at our top 200 projects, but the implications of that, given £15 billion that's being spent there a year, are really significant, and they're significant not just now, but way out into the future. So what we don't just do is look and say, what are the biggest, most expensive projects? We're very much looking and saying, what's the effect of getting these right? Really, really important to us that we are looking at the impact on the citizen or the armed services or whoever from this. So it's the end result that we're looking at. Again, looking at the length of a lot of those projects as we move through, they are long time scales on a lot of them. When you look where a lot of those are ending, unsurprisingly, there's a fair number that complete in the next year or so. There tends to be a cycle that sits around election cycles for some of these things. But then we've got others that are stretching out well into the 2020s. You only have to look at things like the nuclear deterrent, some of the big nuclear programs, look at High Speed 2, some of the rail programs there. They're stretching out for decades ahead of us. And the level of investment and the level of planning associated with those and the ability to deal with change is really significant. So we've got something like 15% of the projects in those top 200 that won't complete for at least another 6 years. So very, very long time scales for some of these things. That puts its own challenges in for us as well. Clearly, complexity plays into that, but also how you ensure consistency across that period. And some of the things that we are now working with departments on around accountability and about clarity for project leaders around that is therefore really important. Again, quick look at costs, seeing what they mean. The majority of the projects we're looking at, less than £500 million. Less than £500 million is a judgmental number based on how big some of the other projects are. These are all extremely sizable and extremely important. And you can see there's a relatively small number there worth more than £10 billion across their life cycle. So really very, very significant numbers involved with this as well. Getting these things right matters to taxpayers, matters for the value for money that government delivers out from all of this as well. And one of the big challenges that we've got is how we bring consistency into delivery there. At the moment, we've still got, as we'll look at in a minute, quite a lot of variation in cost and time performance, and making some better decisions at the outset about how long things are going to take, how much they're going to cost, so we have a consistent basis to make some portfolio judgments. Again, a very important thing that we are working with departments on. Now, each project that we look at, we have a delivery confidence assessment, which we in the MPA produce. It's not produced by departments. In the vast majority of cases, we have the same rating that a department will give. In some, we don't, and there is some debate around those. And what this slide does is look from the first annual reports that we've produced and say, what's the pattern in there? And I've got to say, it was quite depressing when we looked at that, first of all, because from 2012 to 2013 data looked at in isolation, that doesn't look like there's a great improvement starting to show through for the huge effort that we and departments are putting in. Actually, when you look underneath that, the picture is rather different, and that's what we'll do in the next couple of slides. So what this slide does is to look at the projects that are leaving our portfolio, so the ones that we're completing during the year and the ones that we're joining. And actually we had a larger number joining than leaving. But as you'd hope, the ones that were being completed had much better delivery confidence assessments than those that were joining. And that's what you'd expect to see very often, given the inherent uncertainty and the scale of the challenges the government is trying to address on projects. So part of that movement was being seen from the nature of the projects that were leaving and the nature of the projects that were joining the population. But what's actually more interesting than that is if you look at the projects that we'd rated as red or amber red in the first annual report, what's happened to them since? Because there's clearly been huge efforts being put on to driving those projects forward and to improving the delivery confidence. Looking at that slide, you can see that there is a real improvement across the piece from those. So we are having effect when we recognise there are problems with projects. We're being able to deal with those and start to show improvement. The thing that we want to get to is where fewer projects end up in those boxes to start off with, and we get that extra consistency in. And I'm confident that will change, that will happen over time. But given the life cycles for a lot of these projects, it doesn't happen overnight. But that was encouraging to us. This slide just looks across departments, and you'll be pleased to hear I'm not going to attempt to talk through all of that in detail. But if you look at that slide and look at the picture that it's showing, there is no department that is particularly bad or that is particularly good at this. They're all delivering some fantastic project outcomes. We don't seem to celebrate them enough. The media doesn't very much like good news stories. They don't sell half as well as bad news does from it. But government is delivering, and it's delivering large amounts of very challenging projects that are making a huge difference. And I think last night at the Civil Service Awards, you could see some of the winners there were absolutely fantastic examples of some of those successes. When you look and say, okay, if we can have all of this, how confident are we that the pattern that we were starting to see is going to be replicated going forward? And this is the last slide I've got with the data coming through. We could have run through an awful lot more of it, but hopefully this gives you a flavour. And we are starting to see a rather better picture. This is what was reported for September of this year. And again, it's an ever-increasing majority that are coming in that green and amber green area. We've still got some work to do around some of the ambers. The good news that I can report, even though I can't tell you what the detailed data was, is that the outcome picture is better than we had anticipated when the last public data was put out around some of these projects and what's delivering. So I'm confident we're making progress. It's not progress that the MPA takes credit for by itself. It's progress that government in the round is making, and the in excess of 10,000 project professionals we've got in government are starting to make a real difference with. Now, most of the rest of what I'm going to talk about is about people, one way or another. And two slides here which give you different slants on the same pieces of data. From a really good piece of work that PMI did, looking at talent management and looking at how well active talent management affects successful delivery. I won't go through all of the bits in that, and if I flick on to the next slide, you see it a different way around. But a really big difference where people focus not just on training, but also on developing competencies, defining career paths. So training, vitally important, but most of people's expertise comes from experience. So we have to marry the two of those together. The one thing that I will pick out from that is the importance of formal knowledge transfer. And that comes through in spades from, I think, from that slide and from the work that PMI have been doing subsequently. And that's an area where we are looking to put far more emphasis than we've had in the past, which doesn't mean creating very large databases of lessons learned, which very few people look at and very few people interpret well. What we are doing is about getting people to talk to one another, and part of what we can do is to start to make the linkages for people so that they do understand there is somebody who has had every problem that we can think of out there. There's somebody who's found a solution to it, or who's come up with really innovative ways of making things work. And the real strength for government is going to be if we can get one another to share that, and if then progressively we can share that knowledge, and we can have those conversations with the broader project community as well. So that's where we're moving to from it. Now, when we've been thinking about how we develop capability, what's become apparent over time, and this approach is broadly something that I've stolen from NASA, from the work that they did and that Ed Hoffman pioneered there. But we've got an awful lot of activity about building individual competence, but individuals work in teams, and quite a lot of the things, therefore, that we are doing are about how you create high-performing teams, how you give them the knowledge and the understanding, and then how you create the environment within departments that those teams can succeed in. Now, there's a number of things that we can do at a cross-government level about providing leadership and providing a focus and gluing some of that activity together. But the centre of government is never going to be able to mandate and to drive and to force departments to do things that aren't in their own interests. So that is why it becomes really important that we work together. It's worth bearing in mind that picture as we go through the rest of the presentation, because I think that gives you a much better flavour than looking in isolation at some of the work strands that we've got. So accountability, really important that if you're a project leader, you know what you are responsible for delivering and what you are accountable for. And in the past, that hasn't been the case. So we've had a whole range of appointment letters with, and the like, but those lines of responsibility haven't been clear. One really important thing that has happened, actually happened on the 13th of October, the guidance was published, but something called the Motherly Rules, which are about accountability to Parliament, and that goes all the way through from ministers and permanent secretaries, but a really clean and important aspect of that now is that SROs, so senior responsible owners, on the top 200 projects in government will have a direct accountability to Parliament. That means that they need clear appointment letters That's given us a chance then to look and say, how do we get that clarity? And the appointment letters that we are now agreeing, or where there are already existing appointment letters, addendums to those, make very clear what the policy intent is that project is trying to deliver, what the SRO is being asked to deliver, given how long most of the projects go on. The SRO won't be there from start to finish, but actually linking tenure to achieving a key milestone or a key activity on a project. So it could be that you're there for a year, 18 months, or it could be you're there for 4 years. So making very clear what that accountability is, and also making clear what departments and we at the centre of government will do to enable that project leader to deliver. Now those letters will be signed by the permanent secretary of the department, they'll be signed by the head of the MPA, and they will be seen and agreed, but not signed by ministers. What that is doing is starting to, one, lead to some quite difficult conversations, but the much greater due diligence that people are starting to do before taking up posts and looking at what they are actually signing up to is adding some really good realism into the whole accountability process and into the deliverability of projects. So it's potentially a big shift, but a really positive move as we move forward, and we're looking to roll those letters out, working with departments to all SROs over the next 6 months, and the expectation is that SROs will then issue similar letters to their project directors. So that's a big shift for government in what we do. It also means that at the moment our churn rates for SROs and project directors are still far too high. Now there's a number of reasons for that, so some of which are understandable but some of which aren't. This starts to give us much greater clarity about when individual leaders start to become available, when we need to start thinking and planning for replacements, how we actually look and make sure that we are developing the right project leaders with the right skills, given the different stages of the life cycle projects are at and the different challenges that types of projects put on individuals and teams. So it starts to give us a much clearer basis to deliver some of that. Strategic prioritisation, front-end loading, is very much about a series of conversations with departments, and you can read what the slide says around some of those things. So I won't go through all of that with you, but for all of these things, this is about giving the right information to the people who need to make judgments. There's never a right or a wrong answer to which projects you should have in a portfolio and which you should prioritise. It has to be based on a series of judgments, some of which are about the availability of resources, whether that is people or whether it is sufficient funding. Some of it can be around timescale constraints or risks, and I think one of the really interesting things that we're seeing is that some departments in the past have committed to rather more high-risk projects than you might have thought was prudent, and that is now shifting, and people are looking and taking a much more holistic view about how you get a balance of risk and independency in a portfolio. Now, as we've gone out to departments and talked to them about this, I have been really impressed. Every single department is doing something good. Lots of them are doing a whole raft of good things. So what we've been doing, and this is a great example of how we're trying to bring people together to share knowledge and understanding, is rather than start to produce templates and say this is the way you must do it, because every department is different and has a different set of challenges, is to bring together the people who are responsible for advising those making the key judgments and start to say to them, okay, well, if you've got something good, why don't we share it? If you've got a problem, who might know how to deal with that one? So that we can then start to move some of that knowledge around. It sounds a very simple thing to do, but it's having more effect than some of the previous attempts at mandating things. Front-end loading is and Alan in his introduction referred to a report that I produced in a previous life looking at project initiation, largely on the basis that at the MAO all of the analysis that we ever did from our project showed that if you start a project wrong, you will deliver it wrong. And this is very much about how we make some better decisions around what to commit to at the outset. Some of this is around what we at the MPA can do to better support conversations. Some of it is around growing awareness across departments. But a really important piece is around working with other professions. So we're doing a piece of work with colleagues in the policy profession, looking at how we grow an understanding of the effect of the actions of colleagues on the deliverability of projects. Now, whether that's about defining very clearly outcomes, whether it's about not thinking and defining too early how something will be delivered, but what the outcome that's being intended is, whether it's further through making sure that as we get a project up and running properly, we're actually thinking about the full range of benefits that the policy is intended to deliver and making sure we're designing things to do that. And it's really blurring edges. So it's making sure that we get the right conversations at the right time, and in with some of that. Again, that has a potentially significant impact, but it is all about getting people to understand rather than pushing in place big and ornate processes. And for all of that, we therefore need a much clearer role for the profession, for the project delivery profession in government than it had before. So in the past, what we've done is we've started off by focusing very much at developing project leaders, and you know, all of the research suggests that if the leadership is wrong, then the project will fail. So we have the Major Project Leadership Academy now, which by the end of this year will have 340 of the top leaders in government enrolled on it. We've got about 100 people graduated. I've sat on the panels for more than half of those graduations with people. And every single one of them has come in and said, this program has changed what I do and the way I think. What's very noticeable is that it's always changed people and projects in different ways. So it's been really context specific, but it is starting to change. We're starting to get a much more common language. So some of the conversations I'm having at the moment are about how we learn better from history. So reference class forecasting and the like, which is one of the things that we talk about on the Academy. As people have become more aware of that, there's a growing demand. Now we at the Centre in the MPA can help stitch some of that together. We can enable some better gathering of data. But at the end of the day, it's departments that have to input the data and provide it, and it's departments that will get the utility from it. So what we will be doing is looking at how best we enable some of that to happen. We're also now running a pilot for a program the level below that called the Project Leadership Program. So if the MPLA takes about 15 months, it's a significant time commitment, probably 7 or 8 weeks of someone's time, and that's at a point when they're leading a very major project. The Project Leadership Program will take about a third of the time, be about a third of the cost. But it's a consistent learning process with MPLA. So over time, we will grow a group of probably 1,300 to 1,500 project leaders across government that we will continue to develop and continue to utilize across government over a period of time, which gives us a really good baseline to work from. When you then look, it's great having those leaders, but they need the people around them who have the technical expertise and skills, and we need to create the career structures for tomorrow's leaders. And we're working with departments to do that. As part of that, we're changing some of the governance arrangements. So the head of profession role in a department is starting to evolve, so it becomes a more senior role, and we look to get greater resource committed into that, so that we can then we can understand the skills and the competencies people have got, both from their education, but very importantly from their career experience. We can then start to develop those people, both within departments and across government. And importantly, we can put together the understanding we have at an individual departmental level and start to spot where we might have gaps coming up in future, or where we have gaps now in individual areas, so that we can address those before they come through. I think if we'd have done the analysis that we now do around projects and had spotted the significance of the trend towards transformation projects, we would have been able to start to develop a greater depth of expertise in government a little earlier for that. We are doing pretty well now, starting to catch that up, but spotting what the next trend is and seeing how that works, and then working with colleagues in places like the digital profession and the government digital service and the commercial profession to see how we address that becomes really important. So I think we've probably covered through most of the things that are in that slide. The last main slide that I've got, when we first started thinking about this and saying, well, what are the kind of things you want conversations about? These were the bullet points that we came up with. Now, none of them are rocket science. They're things that I'm sure everybody would recognize as they come through, but they prove to be a very helpful framework to start to have conversations. So I have included them here to share with you for what you see. I mean, what we haven't found is that there are huge gaps that aren't being covered by some of those questions and some of those areas as you start to explore them. And they have given us a really good basis to start to share knowledge across government, as I say.